What would you do if a stranger looked you in the eye and told you, you didn't belong? On a quiet evening at San Francisco International Airport, Amara Jacobs, a poised black CEO, walked onto Flight 915, expecting nothing more than a few hours of peaceful travel. But just minutes later, she found herself standing in the aisle, being told to give up the seat she had paid for, to a white man who refused to believe she had the right to sit there. The cameras were rolling. The whispers began. And what started as a single confrontation in first class would ignite a movement that no airline could stop. What hidden systems have been quietly erasing passengers' complaints for years? Who really benefits when bias goes unchecked at 30,000 feet? And how far will one woman go to turn her humiliation into industry-wide change? Stay with us as we follow a journey that began in one seat and ended with the skies never being the same again. If you believe dignity should never be negotiable, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's step onto Flight 915. The voice cut through the cabin like a pocket knife tearing through fabric. This is my seat. It wasn't a question. It was an announcement. Sharp, certain, and loud enough to turn a few heads in business class. Horizon Air Flight 915 was boarding at Gate C12 in San Francisco International. The cabin glowed in warm amber light. Soft jazz drifted through the overhead speakers. Some brushed cymbals and upright bass that tried without much success to make this aluminum tube feel like a lounge. The faint smell of fresh coffee hung in the air, mixed with that sterile tang of recycled air conditioning. Amara Jacobs sat in 3A. Her legs were crossed neatly, her back straight but relaxed. A navy wool suit fit her frame with quiet precision. Around her neck, a silk teal scarf caught the warm light and gave her stillness a certain weight. She was reading The Economist, one finger lightly pressing the page as her eyes moved across a column on global supply chains. Her leather briefcase, dark chestnut with brass hardware, rested beneath the seat in front of her. She didn't flinch at the sound of the voice. She didn't even look up immediately. She let the words hang in the air like smoke from a match. I said, "This is my seat." Now she looked up. Caleb Rhodes stood in the aisle, his boarding pass crushed slightly in his fist. A golf tan stretched across his cheeks, deepened by the flush of annoyance, his belly pushed against a crisp polo shirt that looked one size too small. He had the kind of posture that belonged to a man used to moving through rooms where no one questioned him. "That's 3A, he said, lifting his crumpled ticket like it was a court order. "You must have read it wrong." "Sweetheart." Amara said nothing. Her gaze was steady, her expression unreadable. A soft mirror reflecting his impatience right back at him. "You hear me," he said, leaning slightly toward her. "I paid for this seat." 2 rows ahead. A man in 2B glanced at his companion over the rim of a gin and tonic. In 3B, a young woman in a Stanford hoodie looked up from her laptop. Elena Park. She'd been scrolling through research notes, but now her fingers stilled above the keyboard. The tone Caleb used was familiar to her, the one that left no room for an answer. "I think maybe there's been a mix-up," Elena offered quietly. "No mix-up." Caleb snapped without looking at her. "Some people just don't know how airplane seating works." The words landed with a sting. Elena's thumb hovered over her phone, near the camera icon. Not because she wanted to stir trouble, but because she'd seen this kind of movie before, and the camera always mattered. Amara turned one more page in her magazine. The platinum band on her left hand caught the cabin light. Caleb exhaled through his nose and straightened up. "Look, I don't know how you got past pre-boarding, but this seat is mine." From the front of the cabin, The gate agent appeared, Maya Torres. She was in her mid-30s, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun, a clipboard tucked under one arm. She walked with the practiced pace of someone who'd navigated 100 boarding delays. "Is there a seating issue here?" she asked, her tone calm but with that thin edge of tension. Service workers keep just under the surface. "This woman is in my seat," Caleb said immediately. "It's supposed to be 3A. Maya's eyes flicked to Amara, softened briefly, then returned to a neutral mask. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" "Without a word." Amara reached into her briefcase and handed over her ticket. Maya scanned it, her lips parted slightly. "This shows 3A, she murmured, almost to herself. "That's impossible." Caleb barked. "I booked this months ago." Behind him, Elena angled her phone, framing Maya's slight hesitation in the shot. In her live-stream caption, she typed boarding dispute on Horizon Air 915 business class. 3A. Caleb's voice rose a notch. She probably traded up at the last minute. I've seen this hustle before. Amara's gaze didn't flicker. Elena's viewers ticked past 50. From the cockpit, Captain Reed Lawson stepped out. His navy blazer bore gold-trimmed stripes, and his silver hair was cut with military precision. He had the look of a man who measured situations in terms of control, not optics. "What's the problem?" he asked. "Double booking for 3A," Maya replied. Lawson's eyes moved from Caleb to Amara. His glance lingered on Caleb's expensive watch, his shoes. Then he looked back at Amara's calm face, and something unspoken but familiar passed across his features. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm, "if you don't return to your assigned seat, we'll need to ask you to deplane." Elena blinked. The words landed heavy. Her phone feed jumped past 100 viewers. Amara closed her magazine carefully, placed it on the tray table. Her voice, when she spoke, was even. "I am in my assigned seat." Lawson's jaw tightened. "We're trying to avoid escalation." "She's not escalating anything," Elena said suddenly. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "She's been sitting here quietly since boarding." Lawson turned toward her. "This doesn't concern you, miss." "Actually, it does," Elena replied, lifting her phone a little higher. "You're being recorded by over 300 people right now." Caleb turned sharply. "Are you recording me?" "Yep," Elena said, "and live streaming." The air shifted. A murmur ran through the cabin. Several passengers straightened in their seats. Lawson's voice dropped. "Ma'am, last chance. Either move voluntarily or security will escort you." Amara's eyes met his. No anger, no pleading, just precision. "I think," she said, reaching down for her briefcase, "before you remove me, you should look at this." She unlatched the brass clasp, slid out a single sheet of paper on thick white stock. No flourish, no drama. She handed it to Lawson. He read it once, then again. Color drained from his face. He froze. Maya leaned over his shoulder. Her hand covered her mouth. Caleb frowned. What is it?" No one answered. Amara slid the paper back into her briefcase and returned it to its place by her feet. She picked up her magazine. "This is my seat," she said. "Clearly, the way you state a fact, not a request." Caleb blinked. "That's not possible." "It's not only possible," she said, turning the page, "it's policy." Caleb Rhodes did not sit down. He stood in the aisle like an anchor dropped in shallow water, blocking the row behind him. His voice sharpened. "You must have wandered into the wrong section," he said, as if explaining something to a child. "Business class isn't open seating. It's not—" First come, first serve. Elena Park's phone tilted slightly to keep him in frame. She wasn't trying to be dramatic, but the way his tone carried had a way of making her own heart speed up. She had heard this voice before. It was the kind that closed doors without ever touching them. Maya Torres shifted on her feet. She was still holding Amara's boarding pass in one hand, Caleb's in the other. She glanced at the names, the seat assignments, the timestamps. Her training manual had told her that the passenger who protests loudest often gets priority. She had learned over the years that siding with noise could mean the argument ended faster. "Sir," she began, her tone careful. "Let's just confirm everything before." No, Caleb interrupted. "I don't need confirmation. I have my boarding pass. She doesn't belong here." Amara's gaze stayed steady on him, her magazine resting across her lap. If she felt heat rising in her chest, she didn't show it. Inside, her mind was a still lake with only the smallest ripple. She had been here before, not on this flight, not in this exact seat, but in this exact situation her presence quietly challenged, her legitimacy quietly doubted. Captain Reed Lawson still stood beside Maya, his posture straight, his chin angled toward Caleb as though gravity had pulled him there. "Ma'am," Lawson said to Amara, "you could avoid a scene by simply taking another seat." Amara's fingers tightened slightly on the glossy pages of her magazine. Her voice, when it came, was low enough that the passengers behind Caleb had to lean in to hear it. "Why would I move from the seat I was assigned?" Lawson's lips pressed together in a thin line. "Sometimes it is better to be flexible." The sentence landed heavier than it sounded. Elena caught the exchange in her frame. Her viewers passed 600. The comments were already streaming in. "She's in the right seat. Watch how they treat her. This is why we record everything." Caleb's patience was thinning. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but I am not going to be late to New York because of some mix-up." The pause before the words mix-up carried more than annoyance. It carried dismissal. Maya's mind was racing. She could feel the air in the cabin pressing closer. If she sided with Amara and Caleb was right, she risked a complaint that could follow her for weeks. If she sided with Caleb and Amara was right, she risked something heavier. But in this moment, she leaned toward what felt safer. "Ma'am," she said softly, "could we just have you step aside so we can figure this out?" There it was, the subtle shift. "Not, sir, please step aside. Not even. Let's check both of your documents." Just a quiet redirection aimed only at Amara. Elena saw it. She saw the way Amara's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly. Not surprise, recognition. Amara closed her magazine and set it gently on the tray table. Her left hand rested over the edge of her briefcase, her thumb brushing the worn leather. "Why should I step aside?" she asked, her tone even. "Because you're in the wrong seat," Caleb said before Maya could speak. "And you know that," Amara replied. How he laughed, short and humorless. "Because I paid for it, and you assume that I didn't." The words were not loud, but they seemed to hang in the air longer than the hum of the ventilation. A woman in 2D turned her head. The couple in 4A stopped mid-conversation. Captain Lawson stepped forward. "Ma'am, we are not here to argue intent. We are trying to resolve a seating dispute." "Then resolve it," Amara said. "By verifying the facts." Caleb shook his head. "You know what's happening here? She probably got an upgrade. Someone messed up the system. I've been flying with Horizon Air for 20 years. I know how this works." From her seat, Elena could see Maya hesitate, Her thumb tapped against Caleb's boarding pass, but she still didn't scan it. Her eyes darted to Lawson as if for permission. Inside Amara's mind, the ripple in the lake widened. This wasn't about a chair or a row. It was about the reflex to believe one story over another without proof. And she knew from experience that once that reflex took root in the moment, it could carry the entire outcome. She could feel the eyes on her now, the waiting, the unspoken question. Will she stand up? Will she make it easy for them? She didn't. Instead, she leaned back in her seat, resting her hands on her lap, her voice smooth. I'll be right here when you decide to check both boarding passes. Caleb's jaw flexed. Lawson sighed. Maya opened her mouth, closed it again. The jazz in the overhead speakers had faded into a soft static hum. The air felt heavier. Elena's phone showed 900 viewers now. She could see the chat scrolling faster, a few asking for names, others telling her to keep the camera steady. Caleb finally looked at Maya. You see what I mean? She's being difficult. Just move her so we can leave. Maya took a small step toward Amara. Ma'am, please. Amara didn't move. You haven't checked his boarding pass? The sentence froze Maya in place. She realized she hadn't. She had looked at it, but not scanned it, not verified the digital log. She had assumed, and that realization, small as it was, unsettled her. Captain Lawson glanced toward the front of the cabin. We don't have time for this. Elena spoke up again, surprising even herself. You have time to do it right. A ripple moved through the cabin again. Passengers shifted. Some leaned forward. Caleb turned toward her, his eyes narrowing. You need to stay out of this. I'm in it, Elena said. We all are. And people are watching. Maya's stomach knotted. She could feel every pair of eyes in the cabin pressing on her. She could feel Caleb's urgency on one side and Amara's calm insistence on the other. And somewhere in that pressure, a thought slipped in. Maybe the loudest voice wasn't the truest. She scanned Caleb's pass. Her breath caught. It did not say 3A. For a moment, no one moved. The hum of the air vents filled the silence between Caleb's stiff posture and Maya's startled expression. She was still staring at the small display on her scanner, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something that would make this easier. It says 7C, Maya said finally, her voice low. Your boarding pass, it's for 7C. Caleb blinked as though she had spoken another language. That's impossible. I booked 3A. I've been sitting in 3A for years. You booked 7C? Maya said again, this time with more certainty. It shows you were reassigned this morning. That's not right. Someone messed up. His words sharpened, clipping each syllable. He turned to Lawson. Captain, fix this. Lawson's gaze swept from Maya to Caleb, then back to Amara. His jaw was tight. Let's not make this into a bigger issue than it needs to be, he said. Amara's hands rested calmly on her lap. Inside, her mind was collecting the pieces of this moment, the uneven weight in every glance, the reflex to question her first, the avoidance of a simple verification until pushed. You asked me to be flexible, she said to Lawson, her voice steady. But you didn't ask him. Caleb gave a short, incredulous laugh. Why would he ask me I know my seat? Because knowing is not the same as being right. Amara replied. Elena's phone feed jumped past 1,200 viewers. The comments were a flood now, some urging her to keep filming, others typing in capital letters about what they were witnessing. Lawson shifted his weight. Ms. Jacobs, if we can just move you for now. My name is Amara, she said, her tone precise, and I will not be moving. Caleb's voice rose. This is ridiculous. I've been a Horizon Air frequent flyer for 2 decades. And that entitles you to override a boarding pass, she asked. The cabin had grown still. Even those pretending to read or check email were listening now. Caleb's face tightened. You don't understand how these things work. Amara looked at him for a long moment. I understand perfectly. She reached down, her fingers brushing the brass clasp of her briefcase. The leather was warm from the cabin air. She unlatched it, her movements deliberate, and pulled out a single sheet of paper on heavy white stock. The Horizon Air logo sat in the top corner in deep blue ink. 3 signatures lined the bottom in bold black script. She didn't look at Caleb. She didn't look at Maya. She held the paper out to Lawson. Read it. Lawson took it with a guarded expression, his thumb grazing the embossed edge. His eyes moved over the text once, then again. The muscles in his jaw slackened. His breathing changed, just slightly, like the air had shifted inside his chest. Maya leaned in to see. Her lips parted. Her hand came up, almost unconsciously, to cover her mouth. Elna zoomed in on Lawson's frozen expression. The viewership passed 1,500. Comments poured in faster than she could read them. Caleb's impatience was cracking. Well, what is it? Lawson didn't answer. He handed the paper to Maya, who scanned it as if confirming the words were real. She looked at Amara with a mix of recognition and disbelief. What is going on? Caleb demanded. Amara reached for the paper, slid it back into her briefcase, and set it down by her feet. Then she folded her hands over her knees, her posture composed. This is my seat, she said. Caleb's eyes narrowed. That doesn't prove anything. It proves everything, she said, because I don't just hold a ticket. I hold 68% of Horizon Air. The words landed like a sudden drop in cabin pressure. The silence that followed was thicker than before. You could almost hear the collective pause as passengers processed what they had just heard. Lawson cleared his throat. Ms. Jacobs is the majority shareholder. Caleb blinked. You're joking. I don't joke about ownership, Amara said. Maya stepped back slightly, her mind racing. She had been in countless boarding disputes. She had smoothed tempers, calmed egos, even covered small mistakes. But never had she realized that the woman she was about to move from her seat was in effect her ultimate boss. Lawson tried to recover his voice. I had no idea. That's why we verify, Amara replied, because assuming leads to this. Caleb looked around the cabin as if searching for someone to back him up, but no one was meeting his eyes now. The quiet judgment in the air was a kind he wasn't used to feeling. It pressed in on him from every side. Elena's stream ticked past 2,000. The comments now included screenshots of Amara from business magazines, quotes from leadership panels, photos from industry conferences. Someone had even posted a Forbes profile headline in the chat, "The quiet powerhouse behind Horizon Air's global expansion." This is absurd, Caleb said, but the bluster in his tone was thinning. You can't just I can, Amara said, cutting him off gently. And I will. Lawson glanced at Maya. Reassign Mr. Rhodes to his correct seat. Caleb bristled. You can't be serious? You were reassigned to 7C, Maya said, her voice firmer now. This was processed early this morning. He shook his head. I have a meeting in New York. This can't wait. You delayed this flight by 10 minutes already, Amara said. Your meeting can wait. The hum of the vents filled the space again. Elena's camera caught Caleb's tightening grip on his carry-on. He looked at Lawson, then at Maya, but the resistance in their expressions had softened. The tide had turned. "I will not forget this," Caleb muttered. Amara's eyes held his. "Neither will I." He finally stepped back, moving toward the aisle. A couple of passengers shifted their knees to let him pass. No one offered him sympathy. Maya turned back to Amara. "Would you like anything before we depart? I'd like you to remember this," Amara said. "Remember how close you came to making the wrong call, because someone spoke louder." Maya swallowed. "I will." Lawson gave a short nod, then returned to the cockpit without another word. Elna lowered her phone slightly, still recording but giving herself a moment to process. She hadn't expected to see the air change like that, to watch the balance of power flip so quietly. Amara picked up her magazine again. Her scarf shifted slightly as she settled back into her seat. Outside, the jet bridge door was closing. Inside, the story had only just begun. The air inside the business class cabin felt heavier now. It was not just the hum of the vents or the faint press of altitude before takeoff. It was the stillness that follows a shift in gravity, when everyone knows something important has just happened and they are waiting to see what it means. Caleb Rhodes had retreated to the aisle, his face still flushed, his shoulders stiff. He held his carry-on against his side like a shield. No one spoke to him. No one offered a sympathetic nod. The couple in 2B sipped their drinks without looking his way. The man in 4C adjusted his headphones and stared straight ahead. Amara Jacobs had not moved. Her scarf caught the cabin light as she turned a page in her magazine, the rustle of paper sounding far louder than it should have. Her leather briefcase sat at her feet again, the clasp closed, the document back inside as if it had never been shown. Elena Park kept filming. Her viewers were past 2,500 now, the comments spilling into a stream she could barely keep up with. Some were posting screenshots from corporate press releases, others typing in capital letters about the woman who owns the airline. Elena felt a strange energy run through her chest. She was no longer just a student on her way to New York. She was a witness to something she could not unsee. Caleb spoke again, his voice lower now but still sharp. "I don't care who she is. She doesn't get to humiliate me." No one answered him. From the front of the cabin, a voice carried back. "Flight supervisor coming through." Heads turned as a tall black woman in a tailored Navy uniform stepped into the aisle. Her short hair was styled close to her head, her steps even and measured. Her badge read, Renee Porter. She had the kind of presence that quieted a room before she said a word. "What's going on here?" she asked. Maya Torres stepped forward quickly, her eyes darting to Amara, then to Caleb. "There was a seating issue," she said. Her tone almost rehearsed. "Seating issue," Renee repeated, not as a question but as an opening for more detail. Caleb saw his chance. "She's in my seat. They reassigned me without telling me. I've been patient, but this has gone on too long." Renee looked at him for a beat, then shifted her gaze to Amara. Her eyes lingered just long enough to register the calm, the lack of tension in Amara's shoulders. Renee's instincts told her that calm was never the whole story. "May I see your boarding pass?" "Ma'am," she asked Amara. Amara handed it over without hesitation. Renee's eyes scanned it, then lifted to Maya, and his Maya held out Caleb's pass. Renee compared the two, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Captain Lawson, who had emerged from the cockpit again and was watching from a few steps back. "This isn't a duplicate booking," Renee said evenly. "He was reassigned this morning to 7C. That's confirmed in the system." Caleb shook his head. No, there's been some mistake. There hasn't, Renee replied. Her tone carried no heat, only certainty. Caleb looked from Renee to Lawson. Captain, you're just going to let this stand. I have a connection. I've been flying with Horizon for 20 years. Lawson hesitated, his gaze flicking toward Amara, then away again. It's her assigned seat, he said finally. Renee turned to Maya. Why wasn't this confirmed before it escalated? Maya shifted uncomfortably. He was louder. I thought she stopped herself, realizing too late what that implied. You thought he was right because he insisted. Renee finished for her. Maya's lips pressed together. I didn't check her boarding pass first. I just reacted. The weight of that admission settled into the air like a slow-falling stone. Amara looked at Maya for a long moment. Her voice was calm, but there was a precision in it that made every word feel sharper. You saw him as legitimate. You saw me as questionable. Maya's throat tightened. I'm not. She stopped again. Bias isn't always about what you intend, Amara said. It's about what you do. Caleb snorted quietly. Here we go. Renee's eyes cut to him. Sir, I'm going to need you to take your assigned seat now. He stared at her, then at Amara, his jaw working as if searching for the right insult. In the end, he said nothing. He turned and walked toward the back of the cabin, the wheels of his carry-on clicking softly against the aisle floor. Renee waited until he was out of earshot, then looked back at Amara. Do you want to file a formal complaint? Amara's gaze didn't waver. I will be contacting the board directly. I don't need to file complaints when I sign off on policy. Maya glanced at Renee, confusion crossing her face. The board. Renee's eyes narrowed slightly as understanding clicked into place. She had read the shareholder briefings. She had seen the name before. The realization brought with it a quiet shift in her stance. Amara reached down and adjusted her briefcase. What matters now is what happens next. Not just for me, but for every passenger who gets questioned before they get verified. Renee gave a short nod. Understood. From her seat, Elena stopped filming for a moment. She let the phone rest in her lap, feeling the thrum in her chest. She had captured the whole thing. She had it all, the tone, the hesitation, the reversal, and somewhere inside her, she knew this would follow her far beyond the flight. The rest of the cabin had gone quiet again. Not the quiet of discomfort, but the quiet of people processing what they had just seen, the quiet of recognition. Amara picked up her magazine again. Her scarf shifted slightly as she crossed her legs. She turned a page without looking up. Outside, ground crew were moving slowly in the fading light. Inside, the flight was still grounded, but something else had already taken off. Renee Porter's presence had steadied the air in the cabin, but the weight of the moment had not lifted. Caleb Rhodes was gone from the front rows now, moved toward the back, yet his absence left a shadow of the conflict still hanging in the space. Passengers leaned back in their seats again, but no one had fully relaxed. Amara Jacobs sat exactly as she had before. Her briefcase rested beside her legs. Her scarf caught the warm cabin light as she turned another page of her magazine. If you had walked onto the plane just now, you would have thought nothing unusual had happened. But the eyes of everyone who had been there told another story. Renee stepped into the aisle beside Amara's seat. Ms. Jacobs, she said quietly, Captain Lawson has confirmed that Mr. Rhodes has been reassigned to 7C. 2 air marshals will be seated nearby for the remainder of the flight. Amara looked up, her expression unreadable. Good. Renee hesitated. He will be escorted from the aircraft upon arrival in New York. Amara nodded once. You are also within your authority to place him on the Horizon Air no-fly list. Renee glanced toward the cockpit where Lawson was watching from the doorway. She lifted her chin slightly. Understood. She made a note on her tablet, her fingers moving quickly. Maya Torres stood a few steps back, her posture tighter than before. The earlier flush in her cheeks had faded, replaced by something heavier. She kept her hands clasped together, her clipboard tucked under her arm. Ms. Jacobs, Maya said, her voice careful. I'm sorry for how I handled this. Amara's gaze met hers, calm but unwavering. You made a choice before you had the facts. I did, Maya admitted. I thought I was resolving it quickly. You thought speed mattered more than accuracy, Amara said, and in doing so, you almost removed the person who was right. Maya's shoulders lowered. I understand. I hope you do, Amara said, because this isn't about me. I had the resources to defend myself. Most passengers don't. Renee shifted her stance. Ms. Jacobs, would you prefer to be moved to first class for the rest of the flight? It's open. Amara's answer came without pause. No, I'll remain where I was assigned. The refusal carried its own kind of weight. It was not about comfort or amenities. It was about the principle of being exactly where you belonged. Elena Park's phone was still running, though she had lowered it to her lap again. She watched the exchange closely. Every detail felt important now, the stillness in Amara's hands, the measured tone in her voice, the way she chose words that could not be misinterpreted. From the cockpit, Captain Lawson stepped forward again. He cleared his throat. Ms. Jacobs, on behalf of the crew, I apologize. Amara didn't look at him immediately. She finished the sentence she was reading, placed the magazine on her lap, then lifted her eyes. I'm not interested in apologies, she said evenly. I'm interested in accountability. Lawson's jaw flexed, but he nodded. Understood. Amara turned slightly toward Renee. After this flight, I want a meeting with senior operations staff. You, Captain Lawson, Ms. Torres, and anyone else responsible for passenger protocol. Renee nodded once. I'll arrange it. Caleb's voice floated faintly from the back of the cabin, too distant to catch words, but close enough for the tone to carry. It was still sharp, still defiant. Renee's glance toward the rear said she had heard it too. Amara picked up her magazine again. Let's proceed with departure. Renee signaled to Lawson. He returned to the cockpit, and the pre-flight checks resumed. The announcements began again over the intercom, polite and measured, as if nothing unusual had happened. But the passengers knew better. The quiet in the cabin was no longer awkward. It was watchful. Maya stepped closer to Amara's seat. Ms. Jacobs, if there's anything I can do, there is, Amara interrupted gently. Remember this moment. Remember how you felt when you realized you had chosen wrong. And next time, choose verification over volume. Maya's eyes lowered. I will. Elena adjusted in her seat beside Amara. I hope you don't mind me recording, she said softly. People are already sharing this. I don't mind, Amara said. In fact, I expect you to share it. The only way change happens is when the truth is visible. Elena gave a small nod. She checked her phone screen. The viewer count had climbed past 3,000. The comments were still flying, people asking for context, people recognizing Amara, people telling their own stories of being questioned for no reason. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the crew prepared for taxi. The engines began their low rumble. the sound vibrating through the floor. Outside the window, ground crew were moving away from the aircraft, their reflective vests catching the last light of the setting sun. But just as the plane began to push back, the intercom chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a brief delay before departure. Thank you for your patience." Amara's eyes lifted toward Renee, who had just finished a quiet exchange with a headset-wearing attendant near the galley. Renee returned to Amara's seat. "The captain has agreed to hold the departure until I've documented this incident for internal reporting," Renee said. "How long?" Amara asked. 15 minutes. "Good," Amara replied. "Sometimes delay is the cost of doing things right." Maya moved down the aisle, checking on passengers, offering quiet reassurances. The murmur of conversation rose and fell, but no one complained loudly. Even those who had sighed at the delay seemed to sense that something larger than a seating issue had taken place. Elena's phone buzzed with notifications. "Someone just clipped the moment you said, 'Verification over volume.' It's already on 2 different social platforms." Amara's gaze remained forward. Then maybe someone else will remember it when it counts. The engines idled as the aircraft sat in place. In the back, Caleb had fallen silent. In the front, Amara sat in 3A, her presence as steady as it had been from the beginning. But now the air around her carried a different weight. It was no longer the weight of being questioned. It was the weight of having the authority to decide what happened next. The aircraft was still sitting at the gate, engines idling softly. When Renee Porter returned from the cockpit and motioned toward the forward galley, her voice was low but firm. "Ms. Jacobs, the captain is ready for you now." Amara closed her magazine and placed it on the armrest. She rose without hurry, her briefcase in hand, and followed Renee toward the small space just ahead of first class. Elena Park stood as well, hesitating for a moment before stepping into the aisle. "I'll wait here," Elena whispered. Amara gave a slight nod before disappearing behind the curtain. The forward galley was narrow but bright under its fluorescent lighting. A fold-down jump seat had been cleared for Amara. Captain Reed Lawson stood with his back against the counter, arms crossed. Maya Torres stood off to the side, her clipboard pressed tightly against her ribs. Renee positioned herself beside the coffee maker, her tablet in hand like a recorder ready to catch every word. Amara sat down and placed her briefcase on the small metal counter beside her. She folded her hands and looked at each of them in turn. "This is not just about a seat," she began. Her voice was calm, but the stillness behind it gave it weight. "It is about a system that failed to protect a passenger from being removed based on an assumption." Lawson's mouth tightened. "We were trying to avoid escalation. You escalated it the moment you believed one passenger without verifying the other," Amara replied. Maya's eyes lowered. "I didn't think to scan his boarding pass right away." "Because he was louder," Amara said. "And because in your mind, that made him more legitimate." Maya's grip on her clipboard shifted. Yes." Renee cleared her throat. "Ms. Jacobs, what would you like us to do now?" Amara reached into her briefcase and withdrew a folder. She opened it to reveal a printed document. The title bold at the top, Passenger Respect Protocol, Emergency Implementation Framework. "This," she said, sliding copies across the small counter to each of them. Lawson glanced down at the first page, his brows furrowed. "You wrote this?" "I have been working on it for months," Amara said. "Because this is the 4th incident like this I have documented on Horizon Air this year. The difference is that today, I was the subject." Renee began scanning the bullet points. Real-time bias flagging tool embedded in staff tablets. Direct escalation channel to the board for discrimination complaints. Anonymous passenger incident reports routed to a third-party audit firm. Mandatory quarterly unconscious bias certification for all customer-facing employees. That's correct, Amara said. And failure to complete certification will result in suspension without pay until the training is completed. Lawson looked up. You're proposing a complete overhaul. I am not proposing, Amara said evenly. I am implementing. The fluorescent lighting hummed softly above them. The low murmur of passengers in the cabin beyond the curtain felt far away now, as if this galley had become its own small boardroom in the sky. Maya shifted her stance. Am I being fired? Amara studied her for a moment. No. You are going to complete the empathy training yourself, and then you are going to lead the new program for gate staff. Maya's eyes widened. Lead it. You made a mistake, Amara said. You can use that mistake to help others avoid the same one. Lawson's jaw flexed again. Are we under investigation? Amara's gaze was steady. I have been in contact with the Department of Transportation's Office of Civil Rights for several months. Today's incident will accelerate their involvement. Renee set her tablet down. You planned this? I tested the system, Amara clarified, and it failed. Lawson leaned back against the counter. And you expect us to just adopt this protocol mid-flight? I expect you to understand that failing to adopt it will have consequences for everyone in this airline, Amara said, including the board of directors. The hum of the lights filled the short silence that followed. Renee picked up her tablet again. I'll have this entered into the system before we depart. We can begin the internal communication tonight. Maya clutched her clipboard. I'll do the training. Amara looked at her. You'll lead it, and you'll make sure every agent understands that their first responsibility is to verify, not assume. Lawson shifted his weight, and Mr. Rhodes Amara's voice was quiet, but final. He will be placed on the no-fly list effective immediately. Renee tapped a note into her tablet. Consider it done. There was a pause, the kind that settles over a room when all the major decisions have been made and the weight of them is just beginning to sink in. Beyond the curtain, a flight attendant's voice carried faintly over the intercom, asking passengers to remain seated. Amara closed her folder and returned it to her briefcase. From now on, the cost of being wrong will outweigh the convenience of being quick. Renee's eyes met hers. Understood. Lawson looked down at the document again, then back up. We'll make the adjustments. Not adjustments, Amara said. Reconstruction. She stood, her scarf shifting gently with the movement, and stepped toward the curtain. Before leaving, she looked back at all three of them. Remember this moment, she said, because the next time, it might not be me in that seat, and the person in it might not have the power to change what happens next. With that, she pushed the curtain aside and stepped back into the cabin. Elna was still there, phone in hand, watching. The passengers nearest the galley glanced up as Amara returned to her seat. She sat down, set her briefcase beside her legs, and picked up her magazine again. The engines outside deepened their rumble. This time, when she turned a page, it was not just paper moving. It was the start of something much larger than the space between 3A and the cockpit. The hum of the engines was steady but idle. Outside, the evening light was fading across the tarmac, the last streaks of orange settling over the line of taxiing aircraft. Inside the cabin of Horizon Air Flight 915, the atmosphere had shifted. The ordinary rush to get airborne had been replaced with an alert kind of stillness. as if everyone sensed they were caught in the middle of something larger than a simple delay. Amara Jacobs sat in 3A, her posture unchanged, her scarf resting neatly over her navy suit. The document she had just presented in the galley was back in her briefcase. She had no intention of taking it out again tonight. The important part had already been done. Those who needed to see it had seen it, and the weight of its contents was still sinking in. Renee Porter returned from the front, her expression composed but firm. She leaned slightly toward Amara. "I have confirmed with the captain," Renee said quietly. "We will hold the aircraft here at the gate until all documentation from this incident is logged. Departure is delayed 15 minutes. Amara met her eyes. "Make it 20. I want every part of this recorded accurately." Renee nodded without hesitation and stepped away, signaling to the other crew members. In the seat beside Amara, Elena Park shifted her phone back into her hand. "They're really delaying the flight because of this." "They're delaying the flight," Amara said, "because fixing the system matters more than being on time tonight." Elena's viewers had climbed past 4,000. The comments were a flood of disbelief, support, and questions. She scrolled briefly and saw screenshots of Amara's name on corporate filings, conference stage photos, and even clips from interviews she had given in the past. The chat kept repeating a line Elena herself had caught earlier: verification over volume. Toward the back of the plane, Caleb Rhodes was seated in 7C, his posture stiff, his carry-on wedged under the seat in front of him. 2 air marshals had taken the seats across the aisle, their presence silent but unmistakable. Caleb stared straight ahead, occasionally shaking his head, his lips pressed thin. The murmur of passengers rose and fell. In 2B, a man whispered to his companion, "That's her. She runs the airline?" In 4A, a woman was typing rapidly into her phone, likely relaying the story to someone waiting in New York. No one seemed particularly impatient about the delay anymore. Curiosity had replaced frustration. Maya Torres walked slowly down the aisle, checking on passengers, offering water to those who wanted it. She paused beside Amara. "Miss Jacobs," Maya said softly, "I've entered my initial report. I'll add the rest after we land." Amara looked up from her magazine. "You will also include a full account of your decision-making process tonight. Be honest about what you assumed and why." Maya's gaze dropped briefly. "Yes, ma'am." "You have an opportunity now," Amara continued, "to show that learning is possible after a mistake. Do not waste it." Maya nodded and moved on, the weight of the words lingering behind her. Over the intercom, Captain Reed Lawson's voice came through, formal and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are finalizing some pre-departure procedures. We will update you shortly." Renee stopped briefly at the bulkhead, her tablet in hand, entering details into the incident log. She had already messaged Operations Control, attaching a scan of the passenger respect protocol Amara had handed her. The quiet efficiency of her movements made it clear that she had no intention of letting this be treated as a minor disruption. Amara returned her attention to Elena. "How many are watching now?" Elena glanced at her phone. "Over 5,000. And the clip of you in the galley is being shared separately. Someone's already put subtitles on it." "Good," Amara said. "Let them see exactly what happened." The minutes passed slowly, each one marked by the soft sound of typing, the low hum of conversation, and the occasional clink of ice in glasses. The crew moved with calm precision, but the normal pre-flight rhythm had been replaced by something deliberate and investigative. At one point, a man from row 6 stood and walked forward, pausing beside Amara's seat. "I just wanted to say," he murmured, Thank you for not letting it slide. Amara's eyes met his briefly. Thank you for noticing. He nodded once and returned to his seat. Renee appeared again, standing just beside 3A. The log is complete. Captain Lawson is ready to push back. Not yet, Amara said. One more thing. Renee waited. I want Mr. Rhodes informed now that he is on the Horizon Air no-fly list, effective immediately. Renee's eyes flickered with understanding. I'll have the marshals tell him. She turned and walked toward the back. From her seat, Elna could see the moment the air marshal leaned toward Caleb. His expression shifted from stubborn defiance to open disbelief. His voice rose for a second, but whatever he said was too quiet to carry to the front. The marshal's tone was even but unyielding. When Renee returned, she simply said, It's done. Amara closed her magazine. Now we can depart. Renee gave the signal to Lawson. Moments later, the engines began their deeper rumble. The plane inched back from the gate, the slow roll toward the taxiway beginning at last. As the cabin settled into the rhythm of departure, Ilona turned her camera slightly, catching Amara's profile against the soft cabin lighting. There was no sign of triumph in her expression, no outward satisfaction, only the same composed stillness she had carried from the beginning. Helena thought about how most people, when confronted like Amara had been, might have argued, might have raised their voice, might have matched volume with volume, but Amara had done none of that. She had let the assumptions reveal themselves first, then replaced them with facts that could not be ignored. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed on. The cabin crew began their safety demonstration, the familiar motions almost surreal after what had unfolded in this space. As the plane rolled toward the runway, Amara leaned back in her seat and glanced at Elena. This, she said quietly, is just the beginning. Elena nodded, the weight of those words settling in her chest. She knew the story was far from over. She also knew her viewers were about to witness something that could ripple far beyond the aisle of this plane. The aircraft turned toward the runway. Outside, the lights along the tarmac glowed against the darkening sky. Inside, the passengers settled into their seats, but many still carried the awareness that they had been present for something rare. When the engine surged and the plane lifted off, the ground falling away beneath them, Amara kept her gaze steady ahead. She knew that in a matter of hours, she would be sitting in a room with the people who could change how Horizon Air treated its passengers, and she intended to make sure they left that room knowing exactly what was at stake. The morning after Flight 915 landed in New York, the sky over the city was a pale, early winter gray. Inside Horizon Air's corporate headquarters, the glass walls of the 23rd floor conference room reflected that muted light, wrapping the long mahogany table in a cold glow. Amara Jacobs stood at the far end of that table, her briefcase placed squarely in front of her. She had been up since before dawn, her hair pulled back neatly, her navy suit pressed to perfection. In front of her, a half circle of executives shifted in their chairs. Some were still adjusting their ties. Others were tapping on their tablets as if that could distract from what was about to happen. Renee Porter was seated halfway down the table, her tablet resting in front of her. The incident report from last night open and ready. Maya Torres sat farther down, looking smaller than usual in the oversized leather chair, a thin notepad clutched in her lap. Captain Reed Lawson leaned back, his expression guarded, hands folded in front of him. At the opposite end of the table sat Jordan Mills, a tall black man in a charcoal suit, his ID badge from the Department of Transportation clipped to his lapel. His presence was quiet but commanding. When he looked at someone, They tended to stop speaking mid-sentence. The CEO of Horizon Air, Richard Callahan, cleared his throat. "Let's get started. Ms. Jacobs, I understand you've requested this meeting as a follow-up to last night's incident." Amara's gaze moved from face to face. Incident is too mild a word for what happened. A passenger was nearly removed from her rightful seat because an employee chose assumption over verification. She let the silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to settle around the table. This was not just a breach of protocol. She continued, it was a breach of trust. And it is not the first time it has happened on your airline. Richard shifted slightly in his chair. We take all complaints seriously. No, Amara cut in, her voice still calm but carrying over the room. You take them seriously when they create public pressure. Without visibility, they disappear into internal folders. Jordan Mills leaned forward slightly. She's not wrong. We've tracked similar incidents across multiple carriers, including Horizon. Public cases get addressed. Quiet ones vanish. Maya glanced down at her notepad. Her pen tapped against the paper, a nervous rhythm she seemed unaware of. Amara reached into her briefcase and withdrew the passenger respect protocol again, sliding copies down both sides of the table. This will be implemented in full across all Horizon operations. Richard didn't touch the paper immediately. With all due respect, you are a valued partner, but you don't run this airline. I run a global logistics firm that controls 15% of Horizon's cargo contracts, Amara said evenly. If this protocol is not adopted, those contracts are terminated within 30 days. The shuffle of paper stopped. Heads turned toward Richard, whose jaw had tightened. Jordan broke the silence. From a regulatory standpoint, it's not only wise to adopt something like this, it's protective. If this hits the press, and I assure you it will, you'll be answering not just to your board, but to Congress. Renee spoke next, her tone measured. The protocol addresses every gap I saw last night. Real-time bias flagging, independent audits, mandatory empathy certification. If we had this in place, last night would not have happened. Lawson shifted in his seat. Last night escalated because of a misunderstanding. Amara's eyes locked on him. It escalated because the loudest voice in the room was believed without question, and because the quieter one belonged to a black woman. The room went still. Richard's fingers tapped against the table once, then stopped. Implementation on this scale will require training, systems integration, policy review. And all of that begins today, Amara said, with Maya Torres as lead for gate operations training. Maya's head jerked up. Me. You will lead it because you understand what it feels like to get it wrong, Amara said, and you will make sure no one else repeats your mistake. Maya swallowed hard, then nodded. I'll do it. Jordan made a note on his legal pad. DOT will require quarterly reporting on compliance for the first year, and I'll be reviewing those personally. Richard finally picked up the document in front of him. He scanned the first page, then the second. If we agree to this, Ms. Jacobs, what's your assurance that the matter ends here? Amara's gaze was steady. There is no assurance. Change is ongoing. This meeting is not the end. It is the beginning of your accountability. Jordan looked from Amara to Richard. You're not negotiating with a consultant. You're negotiating with someone who can alter your market position overnight. Richard's jaw flexed again. Then he leaned back and set the protocol down. We'll move forward. Amara didn't smile. She simply gathered her papers. Good. You'll schedule the first training session within 7 days? I expect confirmation before the end of business." She closed her briefcase and stepped away from the table. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back. "Remember," she said, her voice carrying clearly, "last night was not about me. It was about the next passenger who won't have the leverage I do. If you fail them, this room will see me again on my terms." Then she walked out, Jordan falling into step beside her. In the hallway, he gave a low whistle. "You don't waste words," he said. "I don't have the time," Amara replied. They reached the elevator. As the doors slid open, Jordan glanced at her. "I've sat in a lot of boardrooms. That was one of the few where people actually listened." Amara stepped inside. They listened because they had no choice. As the elevator descended, Amara's phone buzzed. A message from Elena Park lit the screen. The video from last night just passed 2 million views. Amara locked the phone without replying. Numbers didn't matter. What mattered was whether Horizon Air understood that their time of quiet errors had ended. By midday, the winter light over Manhattan had sharpened into a crisp blue sky. From the 23rd floor of her hotel, Amara Jacobs could see the Hudson River flashing under the sun. It should have been the kind of morning that invited quiet reflection, but her phone had been vibrating steadily since 7 o'clock. She stood at the small desk by the window, scrolling through the news alerts. Major outlets had picked up the story from Elena Park's live stream. Headlines varied in tone, but shared the same core black CEO removed from seat on Horizon Air. Video surfaces of onboard confrontation, passenger challenges, airline bias. Clips from the flight had been edited into short videos that spread across multiple platforms. The most shared one opened with Caleb Rhodes standing in the aisle, his voice raised, insisting that 3A was his. Then it cut to Amara's calm, steady voice in the galley, outlining the importance of verification over assumption. Each time Amara watched it, she felt the same quiet unease. The world was seeing the moment, but not the full weight behind it. What happened on Flight 915 was more than a viral clip. It was a symptom of something deeper, something that would not be fixed with a single meeting. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Renee Porter. "They're getting hit hard," Renee said without preamble. "Call volumes at the customer service line have tripled. People are demanding to know what changes are being made." "Good," Amara replied. "Let them feel the urgency. They want to issue a statement today. Public relations is scrambling for language." Amara stepped away from the desk, looking out at the river. Make sure the statement acknowledges the systemic issue, not just this flight. If they try to frame it as an isolated incident, the backlash will double. "I'll push for that," Renee said. "Also, you should know Caleb Rhodes is doing interviews." Amara turned from the window. "What is he saying? That he was the one harassed? That you were using your influence to humiliate him?" The faintest sigh escaped her. "Let him. The footage speaks for itself." After they ended the call, Amara checked her email. Messages from strangers filled her inbox. Some were heartfelt, thanking her for standing up without raising her voice. Others were painful to read. Stories from people who had been through similar incidents and left the plane feeling invisible. She opened one from a woman in Denver. "I'm not a CEO. I'm not even a manager. Last year, a gate agent gave my seat away to someone else while I was in the restroom. They told me it was my fault for not being at the gate when they called the zone, even though it was 30 minutes before departure. I cried in the airport bathroom. No one cared. Seeing you last night, it felt like you were fighting for me too." Amara sat with that for a moment. Then she replied with a brief thank you and a promise that she would not let Horizon Air bury this under PR spin. Later that afternoon, she met Jordan Mills at a coffee shop near the DOT's regional office. The noise of espresso machines and low conversation filled the space. "You've got momentum," Jordan said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "But you know how these stories go. News cycle moves on, and airlines count on that. That is why the protocol has to be visible," Amara said. "If the public sees implementation, they'll hold Horizon accountable." Jordan nodded. "The board won't fight you now, but middle management will. The resistance will be quiet, procedural, delayed training, selective enforcement. Then we create a reporting structure that bypasses them," Amara replied. "Direct to the top, with federal oversight." Jordan gave a small smile. "You don't just want this fixed for Horizon, do you?" Amara sipped her tea before answering. "Horizon is just where it started. If one airline changes, others will follow." As they spoke, across the city in Horizon's PR office, staff were huddled around a speakerphone. Richard Callahan's voice came through from his private office. "We need to release something within the hour," Richard said. "Acknowledgement, commitment to review policies, that sort of thing." One of the communications managers cleared her throat. "The public wants specifics. They've seen the protocol. They want to know if we're adopting it." There was a pause on the line. "We will say we are reviewing it for possible adoption." Another pause, heavier this time, as the team exchanged looks. Back at the hotel, Amara received a text from Elna Hurd from a friend at HQ. "They're stalling on the statement, trying to soften it." Amara typed back quickly. "Then we don't wait for them." Within minutes, she drafted her own statement and sent it to several journalists she trusted. It outlined the core points of the Passenger Respect Protocol and confirmed that Horizon Air had agreed in principle to implement it. She included a line that she knew would land in every headline. "Silence allows bias to survive. Transparency dismantles it." By the time Horizon's official statement went live, Amara's version was already being quoted on national news. Public response to the company's vague language was swift and critical. Hashtags calling for immediate implementation trended by evening. Caleb Rhodes appeared on a late-night talk show, his tone defensive but careful. He insisted he had not seen Amara's name on the boarding pass when he challenged her seat. The host played a clip from the flight showing him refusing to let her speak. The audience reaction was sharp and unmistakable. In her hotel room, Amara watched the segment without expression. Then she muted the television and sat in the quiet, letting the weight of the day settle. She knew tomorrow would bring more interviews, more calls, more scrutiny. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. On her phone, another email notification appeared. This one was from an attorney representing a group of former airline employees who claimed they had been pressured to overlook passenger complaints. They wanted to meet. Amara closed her eyes for a moment. The circle was widening. What began as a confrontation in 3A was becoming something larger, more dangerous for those who preferred the status quo. She opened her eyes again, and the quiet in the room shifted. It was no longer the stillness of exhaustion, but the focus before the next move. The conference room on the 12th floor of a modest midtown office building smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. It was a far cry from the gleaming glass towers where Amara Jacobs usually held her meetings. The table was scratched in places, the blinds slightly bent, but the people gathered around the table carried a tension that had nothing to do with the decor. 5 former airline employees sat facing her, each with a folder or envelope in front of them. They had come from different carriers, not just Horizon Air. and their faces reflected a mix of apprehension and determination. A man in his late 50s with thinning hair introduced himself as Leonard Graves, a retired gate supervisor. Beside him was Sofia Delgado, a former customer service manager whose eyes darted to the door every few seconds as if expecting someone to interrupt. Next to her, two younger flight attendants sat side by side, their hands clasped tightly in their laps. At the far end, a woman with a sharp jawline and streaks of gray in her hair introduced herself simply as Dana Lowe, former corporate compliance officer. Amara placed her briefcase on the table, but didn't open it. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," she said, her voice even. "I understand the risks you're taking." Leonard cleared his throat. "We're here because we've all seen it. We've all been told to keep quiet." Sophia leaned forward. "It's not just bias at the gate. It's what happens after. Complaints are rerouted into a category that doesn't trigger follow-up. Those files never make it past mid-management." The younger of the two attendants spoke next, her voice barely above a whisper. "If we filed a report about discrimination, we'd get called into a meeting and told it was a misunderstanding. Then our schedules would suddenly change. Shorter routes, less desirable shifts." Dana opened her folder and slid several pages toward Amara. "This is from Horizon Air's internal communications. It shows a pattern of reclassifying complaints to avoid regulatory reporting thresholds." Amara scanned the documents. The language was sterile, but the implications were sharp. Reassign incident type, remove bias indicator. Mark resolved after customer service call. It was a blueprint for invisibility. "How far back does this go?" Amara asked without looking up. "Years," Dana replied. "And it's not unique to Horizon. Other carriers have similar systems, but Horizon has perfected the quiet burial." Leonard shifted in his seat. "You're in a position to make noise. We can't do that without losing everything. Some of us already have." Amara looked around the table. "If I move forward with this, it won't be quiet. The media will know. Regulators will have to act. Are you ready for that level of exposure?" Sophia exhaled slowly. "We wouldn't be here if we weren't." One of the younger attendants spoke again, her voice steadier this time. "We're tired of watching it happen. Tired of seeing passengers leave in tears while we're told to smile and move on." Amara nodded, her mind already building the framework for the next step. "I'll need copies of everything you're willing to share, originals if possible, and I'll need you to be prepared to testify if it comes to that." Dana's gaze didn't waver. "We're prepared." As the meeting went on, details began to spill into the open. Specific cases, names of managers who had pressured staff to downplay incidents, internal memos that framed bias complaints as subjective perception rather than policy violations. The room grew heavier with each revelation. When the last document had been handed over, Amara closed her briefcase. "This will not disappear into another folder. I will see to that personally." They left one by one, each taking a moment to glance down the hall before stepping into the elevator. By the time the last door closed, Amara was alone with Donna. "You know this will get ugly," Donna said quietly. "It's already ugly," Amara replied. "We're just bringing it into the light." That evening, back at her hotel, Amara spread the documents across the desk. The evidence formed a map, one she could follow from the gate counter to the corporate suite. The pattern was clear delay, dilute, dismiss. If passengers didn't have leverage or a camera, they never saw justice. Her phone rang. It was Jordan Mills. "You got the files?" he asked. "I did," she said. "And they're worse than I thought." Jordan's voice tightened. "We can open a formal investigation with this. It'll take months, maybe longer. but it'll be solid. Months is too long, Amara said. We need public accountability now. Jordan hesitated. You're talking about going public before the investigation. Yes, she replied, because by the time the investigation ends, they'll have found ways to frame it as outdated or irrelevant. The public needs to see the system as it is today. Jordan sighed but didn't argue. If you do this, you'll have every airline lobbyist in Dekang aiming at you. Amara looked at the spread of papers in front of her. Let them aim. I've been a target before. After they hung up, she called Elena Park. The young woman's voice was alert despite the late hour. I need you to help me tell a bigger story, Amara said. Not just what happened to me. What's been happening for years. Elena didn't hesitate. Send me what you have. Over the next hour. Amara scanned and encrypted the key documents, sending them to Elena with notes on how each fit into the larger picture. When the last file had been sent, she leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. The fight had shifted. This was no longer about Horizon Air alone. This was about every passenger who had been silenced, every complaint rerouted into a dead file. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a message from Elena. I've gone through the first batch. This isn't just a story. It's a movement waiting to happen. Amara typed back, then let's move. By sunrise, Elena Park's story was everywhere. She had posted it at midnight, a seamless blend of her live stream footage from Flight 915, the internal documents Amara Jacobs provided, and interviews with the whistleblowers. The article was long but gripping, weaving individual accounts into a devastating picture of how bias complaints vanished inside airline systems. It was paired with a 10-minute video that opened with Amara's calm voice on the plane. Then cut to Leonard Graves describing how he had been told to reclassify passenger grievances so they would never be seen by regulators. The story caught fire while the city was still sleeping. By morning, hashtags demanding airline accountability topped the trending lists. The phrase passenger respect protocol became a rallying cry. News anchors read excerpts on air, their voices tight with disbelief. Radio shows debated how deep the industry's problems ran. Amara sat at the small table in her hotel room, coffee cooling beside her as she scrolled through the coverage. It was moving faster than she expected, faster than Horizon Air could control. Her phone buzzed with a call from Jordan Mills. You've lit a match in a room full of gasoline, he said. It was already full, Amara replied. I just struck the match where people could see it. Jordan's tone was serious. I just got a call from my director. DOT is going to launch a formal industry-wide audit. Multiple airlines. They want you to testify. Amara leaned back slightly. When, as soon as next week, they're moving fast because the public pressure is massive. Across town, inside Horizon Air's headquarters, the atmosphere was brittle. Richard Callahan sat at the head of the executive table, his jaw set. Several board members joined via video conference, their voices overlapping in frustration. This is bleeding into our investor calls. One said, stock is down 4 points since the story hit. Our partners are asking for assurances. Another added, they want to know if we're exposed to federal penalties. Richard raised a hand for quiet. We are exposed. The question is how we respond. If we fight this, we look defensive. If we give in too easily, we look weak. Maya Torres, seated near the coroner, spoke for the first time. If you implement the protocol in full and do it publicly, you can control part of the narrative. Richard's eyes narrowed. You're siding with her. I'm siding with the truth, Maya said evenly. We can't undo what happened on Flight 915, but we can decide what happens next. In the hotel, Amara's inbox was filling with speaking requests from news networks and advocacy groups. She declined most of them. The focus wasn't on her, it was on the system. But when a producer from a respected investigative program reached out, she agreed. They weren't looking for sound bites, they wanted depth. That afternoon, the program recorded her interview in a quiet studio. The host asked about the night of the flight, about Caleb Rhodes, about the confrontation in the galley. But then the questions turned to the documents, the whistleblowers, the systemic burial of complaints. What you're describing, the host said, isn't just a culture problem, it's a structural one. Yes, Amara said, and structure can be changed, but only if we stop pretending these incidents are isolated. They are not. They are connected by process and by choice. When the interview aired that night, the segment with Amara went viral on its own. People clipped her final line. Only if we stop pretending, and posted it alongside personal stories of being dismissed, ignored, or silenced by airline staff. The feed was flooded with voices, each one adding weight to the pressure on the industry. Caleb Rhodes, meanwhile, found the public turning against him. His earlier interviews were dissected and compared against the raw footage. Comments poured in, questioning his motives, his entitlement, and his refusal to listen. He responded once on social media, claiming he was being unfairly targeted. But the backlash only grew. In Washington, airline lobbyists worked frantically to slow the momentum. Calls went out to key lawmakers, urging them to frame the issue as overblown. But the timing was against them. Every news cycle brought another story of a passenger's dignity stripped away at 30,000 feet. Late that night, Amara received a message from Dana Lowe. 3 more former employees reached out after seeing the story. They have records too. Amara typed back, "Set up a meeting. The more we have, the harder it is to bury." Sleep came late and lightly. Her dreams were flashes of boarding gates, clipped voices over intercoms, the cold hum of the cabin air. By morning, she was on a conference call with Jordan and a handful of DOT attorneys. They outlined the testimony schedule, the scope of the audit, the protections for whistleblowers. Jordan's voice carried a new edge of urgency. "This is no longer about Horizon Air alone," he said. "This is about rewriting the rules across the board." After the call, Amara looked out her window toward the skyline. The city felt alive with a kind of electricity, the air thick with the sense that something irreversible had begun. She poured a fresh cup of coffee and allowed herself one still moment before the next call came in, because she knew what was ahead. The hearings, the lobbyist attacks, the subtle, calculated pushback from those who had the most to lose. But she also knew this: once the truth is out in the open, it can be fought, but it cannot be unlearned. And the truth was finally moving at a speed even the airlines could not ground. The hearing room in Washington was colder than Amara expected, not in temperature, but in tone. Rows of chairs were filled with reporters, advocacy groups, and industry representatives. At the long table facing the panel, Amara Jacobs sat with a stack of documents at her right hand, and Jordan Mills seated to her left. The whistleblowers were there too, scattered among the seats behind her, each of them ready to step forward when called. A low hum of voices filled the room until the gavel struck. The chairperson, a sharp-eyed congresswoman from Illinois, leaned toward the microphone. "We are here to examine allegations of systemic discrimination within the airline industry and to review evidence of deliberate obstruction in bias-related passenger complaints." The first hour was a blur of statements from policy experts and regulators. Charts were displayed, numbers rattled off. It was procedural, almost detached. until the panel called Amara. She walked to the witness seat with measured steps, the sound of cameras clicking in the background. After being sworn in, she adjusted the microphone. On December 14th, I boarded Horizon Air Flight 915 from San Francisco to New York. She began. I was assigned seat 3A. I was removed from that seat after a white male passenger challenged my right to sit there, despite my boarding pass clearly confirming it. She let the words settle before continuing. What happened that night was not an isolated incident. It was the visible tip of a system built to shield bias from accountability. She spoke of the whistleblowers, of Leonard's reclassification orders, of Sophia's redirected complaints, of Dana's files that documented an intentional pattern of obstruction. She read excerpts from memos that stripped incidents of their bias indicators, making them invisible to oversight agencies. The room was still as she spoke, the quiet, heavy enough to feel. When the panel opened for questions, one representative asked if she believed this could be fixed without legislation. No. Amara said simply, policy without enforcement is performance. If you want to change the culture, you have to change the cost of ignoring it. Later, Leonard, Sophia, and Dana each gave their testimony. Their voices carried the weariness of people who had seen the same injustice replayed for years. Elna Park's video was entered into the record, projected on a large screen for all to see. The moment Caleb Rhodes blocked Amara in the aisle played without commentary. It didn't need any. By the time the hearing adjourned, the media was already calling it one of the most consequential transportation oversight sessions in recent memory. Outside on the steps, microphones and cameras crowded toward Amara. Questions came rapid and loud. She answered only one. "What happens now?" a reporter called out. She paused, the winter light catching in her eyes. "Now we hold them to the standard they've avoided for too long." That evening, Amara flew back to New York. She booked an aisle seat, far from the front of the cabin. The hum of the engines felt different this time, less like a backdrop and more like a reminder. She thought of the thousands of passengers who would never sit in a hearing room, who would never have a microphone, but whose stories deserved to be part of this fight. A week later, Horizon Air announced they would fully implement the passenger respect protocol, not just on domestic flights, but across their international routes. 3 other major carriers made similar commitments within days. A ripple effect Amara had anticipated, but still felt in her chest when the news broke. Messages poured in from strangers again. Some shared gratitude. Others shared the pain of experiences that mirrored hers. One from the woman in Denver who had written before simply said, "You did it. You really did it." But Amara knew it wasn't done. Implementation was one thing. Enforcement was another. She began building a coalition with advocacy groups and policy organizations, creating an independent monitoring body to track compliance and publish quarterly reports. No airline could quietly bury complaints anymore without the public knowing. Months passed. The heat of the initial media frenzy cooled, but the work continued. One spring morning, Amara stood in a small park by the river, coffee in hand, and watched the city wake. Elena joined her, camera slung over her shoulder. "Feels different now," Elena said. "It is different," Amara replied. "Not perfect, but different." Elena smiled faintly. "You ever think about how much of this started in one seat 3A? Amara looked out over the water. "It didn't start there. It just became visible there." They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Amara's phone buzzed. It was Jordan. The monitoring body's first report was in. She answered, listening as Jordan told her that bias-related incidents had dropped by nearly 40% in the first quarter. "It's working," he said. Amara ended the call and slipped the phone back into her coat pocket. The air smelled faintly of salt and new blossoms. For the first time in months, the tightness in her shoulders eased. Later that afternoon, she walked past a boarding gate at LaGuardia. A black mother with 2 children was checking in, the gate agent greeting them with a smile and verifying their seats without hesitation. It was such a small exchange. But Amara stopped to watch. No raised voices, no dismissive tone, no arbitrary reassignment. The mother noticed her and gave a nod of quiet acknowledgement. Amara returned it before continuing to her own gate. As she sat waiting to board, she thought about the question she had been asked outside the hearing room, "What happens now?" The answer, she realized, was simple. Now, people notice. And when they notice, they speak. And when they speak, silence no longer wins. When her group was called, she boarded without incident, taking her seat by the window. She looked out as the plane taxied, the runway stretching ahead. Somewhere beyond it, the work would continue. But for this moment, she let the hum of the engines be enough. One seat, one moment, one choice to stand up, when it would have been easier to sit down. Amara Jacobs' story is not just about one flight. It is about every silent injustice that has been swept aside. Every passenger told their voice didn't matter. It's about the courage to push back, not with anger, but with undeniable truth. Her fight changed policy. It exposed the hidden walls built to protect bias. And it reminded us that respect in the skies and on the ground is not a privilege. It's a right. We leave this story with 2 truths. First, that discrimination thrives in silence. And second, that silence can be broken by someone willing to speak. So the next time you see a wrong unfolding in front of you, ask yourself, will I let this pass? Or will I be the one to change it? If this story moved you, if it made you think, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you'll be here for the next story that demands to be told. The fight for dignity doesn't end here, and neither do we.